I'm extremely lucky to be here today with Larry Johnson. He's the leader, the chief thinker. Larry, you'll tell us your correct title in a moment. But he essentially advises nonprofits on a variety of fundraising topics with the goal of maximizing their success. Welcome, Larry. How are you today?
Well, I'm fine, Louis, and it's a pleasure to join you. You're always so much fun to be with. Thank you very much. I
Yes,
like
that's
this.
we never get bored.
Never get bored. I love it.
It can be a sickness sometimes. So I'm very grateful to have you today. Larry and I connected. What would you say 2 or 3 months ago? He
Mhm.
so very kindly offered to have me on his podcast, and we had really what was a kind of sociological discussion on giving, on donor participation, on nonprofit trends, and it was so much fun that we kind of decided and correct me, Larry, if this is wrong, but we kind of decided let's just keep the conversation going and do this today. Just
A-
keep talking
Absolutely. As I
about.
said, you're fun to talk to. You're fun to be with. And you always ask, if not the right questions, certainly the probing ones. Let's say it that way.
Thank you. Well, we have you. It's good that we have you here as the guest today because that will give you a chance to point us in the right direction. And for everybody that's tuning in, I just like to say, please introduce yourself. Write in the chat where you're listening in from, what you'd like to get out of this conversation today. We'll learn a little bit more about Larry, and I'll just kick it off with a very big question, which is, Larry, what do you see as the challenges that are facing nonprofits now as we seem to be coming out of the pandemic?
Oh, well, I will answer that question. I just want to reinforce the need, my desire for audience members to make themselves known. I love to hear what's on people's minds. It enables me to really tailor my comments to something that's meaningful to them. I don't get much glory or satisfaction out of just droning on. I like to have something that's worthwhile and meaningful to others. So that being said, well, if you're talking about the revenue area, there are some. The pandemic did make some changes. Some of them positive, some of them negative, but it is what it is. But I think perhaps the most difficult piece that nonprofits are facing, and now that giving is changing, I'll talk about what that means in a minute, that it's becoming more and more critical, and that is for nonprofits to really focus on engaging their investors. And I use that word very deliberately. Donors are investors, whether it's at a very small level and you're responding to a direct mail piece, or it's at a very high level and someone visited you in your living room. It's the same sort of thing, because let's look at what investors mean. Investors are people who invest. Um, they want to see something in return. Now, in the for-profit world, in the business world, they're looking for a material return, and they're tracking that pretty closely. All right, and if you don't deliver, they will go elsewhere. Well, it's the same thing in nonprofits, only they're not looking for a tangible return. They're actually desiring something that is more valuable to them than money. And that is, they're looking for personal fulfillment in what they're trying to achieve. And so when you engage them, and that includes a lot of different things, but in other words, you bring them into the fold metaphorically, and you help them understand how valuable they are and how you're working together with them. uh, That's magic.
Magic. That's
That's
exactly
magic
what it
when that happens. And you
is.
don't have to be sitting in someone's living room or face to face or on video. You can do it through some very carefully crafted communication platforms and schedules. And let's look at annual giving for a minute, because I do want to get back with the challenges. Annual giving, people kind of brush that off. A good chunk of my institutional career was in higher education, and the tiers in higher education, Louis, you're there. Okay. Annual giving, that's the grunt class. And then there's the corporate people. They have a little more respectability, but not much. But the fly boys, they're the major gift people. Oh, yeah, the ones with the expense accounts, the one that spend all the money. How many times did I hear that? Okay. So, but it's a mistake to assume that people who focus on larger gifts, and I'm using the word larger as opposed to major for a reason, uh, operate in some sort of vacuum. They don't. You know, they can't just fly in on a Spitfire and bomb the Luftwaffe and get away with it. You know, no, it doesn't work that way. No, no. There has to be engagement of the donor, and engagement of the donor doesn't begin with them. It begins the very first time a, a prospective investor has any interest at all, you see. And that usually comes in a very small way. And that usually means a simple cash gift in response to some appeal, usually direct mail, or maybe it's on social media in some way. Anyway, it's just out there. So that very first time that a donor steps over that line and says, I'm going to give you a few dollars here. Let's see what you do with it. Okay.
It's a
It's a
test,
test,
right?
right? It's a
I say it all the
test.
time.
It's a test. Now, you know, yes, there are lots of people out there that just kind of throw $5 and $10 at you. I call those, they're not donors, they're responders. Okay. You say thank you, but they're
Thank
not
you.
going anywhere. Okay. So don't worry about them. You know, but the tough part is in the very beginning, it's hard to distinguish who's who.
That
See,
I was going to say that. You
it's
can't
hard.
really tell, no?
No, you can't really tell. So it's important that you have that program, that effort, which treats everyone as a potential serious investor, because everyone is more or less a potential serious investors. And even if you have considerable ability, you're not going to start throwing $1,000 checks around. No, no, you're not going to do that. That's how you got to have considerable ability, not throwing those kinds of checks around. You're very careful how you use your resources. So the major gift people should be very focused on what the annual giving people are doing, how they're responding, how they're reaching out, even the phone-a-thon people. I'll tell you a little story, Lewis. This goes way back. All right.
Oh my goodness.
My, my oldest daughter, when she was in college, and I won't tell you which school she went to, let's just say it was a very fine liberal arts school in the Northeast. I'll leave
Oh
it
my
at that.
goodness.
Okay. Nice, upper kind of liberal arts college. Okay. Well, part of her job was doing the phone-a-thon that fall.
Hmm.
And she was having not the success that she wanted. So, in one of those rare times when your children think you have something to offer them, she called me and she said, Dad, so how do I do this? You know, well, I said, well, what are they asking you to do? How is it set up? And she described the whole thing.
Hmm.
And I said, I wouldn't do it that way. No, here's
Hmm.
how I would do it. I would begin by asking them questions, what's important to them, what sort of experiences they had on campus, and then slowly move that into, would they have an interest in making a gift or renewing their gift? Well, she called me back about a week later. Dad, I'm the top of the sales team. And the guy that's running the annual fund wanted to know what I was doing different than everybody else, because they had the typical beat you over the head sort of approach. I mean, we,
Hmm.
we all know what that is. And he said, and I said, well, my dad does this for a living, and this is what he told me to do. And so, so
That
even
is
at
funny.
that level, um, you can just say, hey, I'm Mary Johnson, and I'm a freshman at X college, and I just reaching out this evening. I want to learn more about you, and I know you're an alum, and da 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 da. I mean, people love that. People love it, especially when it's genuine. And in Mary's case, it was. Um, but she just needs a little guidance. Listen, let's flip that. Let's make it a whole different approach, and then
Counterintuitive, right?
yes, very intuitive. But so anyway, let's talk a little bit about what nonprofits are facing right now.
Hmm.
You know, if for those of you who want any kind of data backup to this, all you have to do is go to Giving Institute and Giving USA. It's all in there. Okay. Now you need to do some interpolation sometimes and look at different charts and kind of put two and two together, but you can see it's all in there. And the number one thing is the number of donors is getting smaller. That's true.
Hmm.
Fewer people are making gifts. Well, before we start setting our hair on fire and thinking that something's really terribly wrong, let's look at the other thing. Well, smaller gifts tend to be diminishing more than the larger gifts. Okay. And now to add insult to injury, the donor renewal rate overall is going down. Okay. And then even though we have more and more communication channels, ways of reaching people, that has the unfortunate outcome of often confusing people more than providing clarity. They're like, oh, God, there's just too much coming at me. All right. So let's address some of these. Um, if you look at all of them, they all go back to some level of engagement issue. All right. Especially when you consider some of the positives. Millennials are giving at an unheard of rate of about 85 to 87%. That is unheard of in my history until, in my generation. I'm a boomer. Okay. You just didn't hear of that. You see, so they want to be involved. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. But they're giving differently. They're giving smaller gifts. They're giving more, 2 or 3 gifts, try you out, move to the next 6 kind of nonprofits, this kind of thing. So for them, engagement's even more of an issue. But there again, let's look at it more deeply, and that is philanthropy, giving, receiving. It's really not about money. That's, and when an organization truly understands that institutionally, then they're set for incredible success. They really are. Now, this is not a new idea. This is not a radical idea, but it's not really been that well disseminated, mainly because it's been pretty much the exclusive domain of a handful of really high performing organizations and a handful of white shoe consulting firms with equally high fees. All right. And so it's sort of one of those, we all know it, but we don't really share it with anybody else. And so that, Lewis, you know me, that's been my goal in my career, is to make this more available to people.
And I love how you think of it as a system, and we'll cover that in a second.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Larry?
Sure.
So what do you tell people who say, well, that used to be the case, you needed to engage people for a ton of years, and we've seen millennials or new billionaires who just give out of the blue to organizations, and that's the future. Do you agree with that? Is that an exception? What is your reaction to that? I've read about that point of view.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, the engagement cycle is still there, but with younger people, it has collapsed. It's much shorter than it used to be. The half-life used to be 18 months. Now it's 90 days. Okay, it's that kind of thing. So you've got to be, that's the first thing. Secondly, what you're talking about in the second thing is something that's known as philanthrocapitalism, where very wealthy people who've sort of got it by almost not doing anything but waking up feel the need to fix society. All right. So their approach is not so much to give to existing organizations and build a relationship, but to discover a problem they want to solve, and then they just throw money at it. Okay. And whoever happens to be in that particular area gets a large S. But there's a downside to that. And the downside is those people usually want a lot more control than a conventional philanthropist does, because they're the ones with all the great ideas, or they think they're the ones with all the great ideas. And that's how they do that. That is a very small piece of what's actually going on. And actually, there's been some pushback, not so much in this country, but I know you may know, Lewis, that I'm involved in India, and which is a growing philanthropic market. The Indian government has recently outlawed that kind of money. You can't even do it in India anymore.
Come on.
They don't want Bill Gates, ixnay, we're not interested in you. That's their whole approach. And for me, that's a good thing, because what I teach people to do is to develop indigenous philanthropy. And there's certainly enough money in India. It's just a matter of engaging it in the right way. India, I don't know what you know about the country, but it's a country of great extremes, extreme wealth, extreme poverty. It is also the largest democracy in the world. So, I mean, it has all those dynamics that are going on. But that's a whole different issue. But yeah, did that answer your question, Lewis?
Totally, totally. So, I guess in a nutshell, it's about being sustainable, right? Into developing a sustainable
Yes.
resource or relationship. I want to invite everybody that's here. Thank you so much for chatting in. Please feel free to ask your questions. We have an expert here with us today, Larry Johnson, and we need to take advantage of it. So, if anything that he's speaking about resonates with you or brings up a situation at work that you had trouble with, please feel free to write in. I'm sure his comments will be
Okay.
very insightful.
Ask me questions like I live in the Rockies. You want to come skiing? I can tell you where to go skiing. In fact, last Friday in the Wall Street Journal, for the what 35th time, Sun Valley was designated the the top ski resort in North America again. So
And do they
why?
fundraise?
Oh, it's all private. They don't do any
Oh,
fundraising.
oh.
Sorry. But hey, but they do give money to the community in Ketchum where they are.
Yep.
In fact, the nonprofits do pretty well up there. But it's a gorgeous place. It's a little bit. It's not like your typical Western ski resort. It is more like a European resort. In fact, a friend of mine from New York, who was a ski racer, said it reminded him of St. Moritz when he went there. He'd never been there, and he was like, "Whoa, this is like Switzerland." Of course, it doesn't hurt Lewis that they still maintain an all Austrian ski staff, so kind of
Oh my goodness.
adds to the
Well,
ambiance. So, anyways, but hey,
so
it's in Idaho.
thinking about fundraising challenges and your ski story, is the snow melting? So we're talking about engagement, and we're talking about shedding the number of the donor number that's diminishing. So is the snow melting underneath our skis? Is my question to you.
Well, if you want to use that analogy, it could be. Because you've got to have the ground prepared properly. The ground has to be groomed. Good skiing slopes don't just happen because if you don't groom a ski slope, Lewis, sooner or later you're going to get something that no one likes. It's called an avalanche. All
Mm.
right. And I don't
Oh, I
know.
like this. I like where this is going.
And I don't know how many of our viewers today have ever seen or heard an avalanche, but it is incredible. It will absolutely. You think what power that is coming off the mountain. One spring a few years ago, I was driving up there, and of course, there's still cleaning up the roads from the winter, and off to the right was this huge, what appeared to be snowball. Okay, and it had come off the mountain, and it was the size of a two-story house, and sticking out of it were these tree trunks of 50-foot pine trees, like a cheese ball with toothpicks as it rolled off the mountain. So you don't want to be in the path of anything like that. Oh no.
So is something like that happening for nonprofits?
You know, I don't like to be a prognosticator, but let me just say that a lot of nonprofits are living on the edge. They're
Mm-hmm.
living on the real edge. And I think, we saw some of that during the pandemic when those who were overly dependent on live events and transactional fundraising suddenly were, oh, what are we going to be doing here? Because that wasn't available to them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping, hope springs eternal, that
Mm-hmm.
some of those organizations got the message and realized they had to start doing things a little differently. And that doesn't mean just shift it to online. Okay, that means
Mm-hmm.
let's
Send
rethink.
more emails. Everybody loves emails.
Oh, everybody loves emails. Yeah, yeah. I have gotten to the point where sometimes I actually delete something that I want to keep because I get in this method of just doing
Mm-hmm.
this, trying to get to something that I'm looking for. So, but I don't. Here's what I don't do. I don't unsubscribe hardly ever because I like to know what's going on out there. And
Interesting.
and sometimes I see stuff going, oh, look at this or look at this. So anyway, so
Mm-hmm.
let's go back. What is the paradigm that works? All right, that is, don't think of fundraising as the exercise of I have a mission, I need money, I'm going to go out here and get it and bring it back and fulfill my mission. No, think of it this way: your organization is one of two parties. You've got the ideas and the mission, and the other party has the fuel. And it's two parties coming together to create something that neither of you can do alone. And if you will really think that through and what that means, that will have an impact on every piece of your fundraising program, right down to your appeal letters, the thank you calls, or whatever it is you're doing. That will influence everything you're doing. Not to mention what the leadership of the organization should be doing. That's a whole different issue. And we could talk about that forever, right? Okay. So,
But that brings a really good critique to, not critique, but something people usually react when we share this type of approach, is that won't that cause mission creep, or won't that give us a lot of opinions and thoughts and people wanting to get into our business that we don't need or have the capacity to deal with? What do you tell your clients when they respond in that way?
well, if I know them well enough, I'll say, you're really flattering yourself, okay? Because your donors are not that interested in what you're doing in the first place. And what I'm saying is, they're not
Mhm.
interested in what you're doing. They're interested in fulfilling their dreams, okay, which can be two different things. But your goal as an organization is to so marry your mission with their dreams so that they're one and the same. And I can tell you that the specter of the overly busybody donor coming in and trying to mess in your business is very much it's a red herring, because people's time is more important than their money, especially today. So unless you're
Well,
hooked
it's an
up with a
attention economy, right?
right, unless you're hooked up with a philanthrocapitalist, okay. And if you ever see that kind of money coming at you, it's almost always a Faustian bargain. So I give you a warning up front, okay? Because they will get in and they will want to. In fact, I know of an organization right now in California where their stated mission has nothing to do with the millions of dollars that are flowing into that organization. And they're not quite, the CEO doesn't see that, but the development staff sees that. And sooner or later, there's going to be this meeting of the minds there. So it's called, it's being, all that lovely money is kind of getting in the way. But yeah, it's very,
Wonderful.
and I've been in the business, 30 plus years. I've maybe met a half a dozen donors that really wanted more influence than they were buying.
Please, everybody, take note of that. Larry, I'm going to point out some really good comments in the chat. Jennifer says, and big donors have more money than time. So something less to worry about.
Yes.
Louis Biggie asks, does the shift from smaller to larger donors present a risk of too many eggs in too few baskets? How do you suggest managing that as a growing risk?
Well, it's never a good idea to be dependent on a handful of people. It's never good. So I think one way you do want a program that stresses the need to build your donors. And I think if you're looking at an annual giving program, and I'm talking to the annual giving guy right now, all right, that understands that you should be able to avoid that, because there again, that's an overall trend. That's not the same. That's not the trend in every organization. It depends a lot on what that organization is doing. Like one of the things that's real popular now, and it does work if it's run well, and that's what they call a monthly giving program. I know a couple of organizations that do that, and they do that well. And that's a way that they continue to grow a donor base. And they also tend to counteract the lower renewal rates. Renewal rates have always been pretty pathetic. And I really mean that, because when you've got an overall charitable fundraising renewal rate, first year renewal rate, that is, if someone gives this year for the first time, what's the probability they're going to give again next year? That's what that means. It's hovered around 40% or a little lower for years. That's pathetic. I mean, you look at the consumer products renewal rates, they're like at 95%. And so Procter and Gamble knows how to get you to keep buying Crest toothpaste. They know how to do that. Okay, take a lesson from them. And they're not doing it through subterfuge. They're doing it through an honest, open appeal to the customers' needs and wants. But they're not
I love
changing
it.
the formula of Crest.
Something I love about you, Larry, is that you bring an engineer's mentality to thinking about fundraising, not only kind of that mythology of the frontline fundraiser where it's all about the ask, but thinking of it as a system.
Hmm.
So it's truly valued. Let me ask you another really good question from Maria Elena. She says, "What is the best strategy to gain buy-in from your team to try a different approach? There's lots of people that are nervous if there's any pause in funds coming in. I see there's a bit of panic on the horizon. Should we try something new, especially after seeing so much come in response to COVID?" So a little bit of, we had a big surge. Now, why are you even talking about changes? It's just going to make us feel very uncomfortable.
Well, a couple of things. First, the surge was just that, a one-time surge that your particular organization happened to benefit from. And that those surges were uneven. It depended on what you were doing, what you were serving, what your reason for existing was. Um, One thing that, here this goes back to the systematic approach. One thing that I always instituted in whatever university I was in at the time was we did a giving curve and a calendar. And when you've got 5 years of data, you're going to be able to have a pretty predictable curve of when your money is coming in.
Lovely.
So that
So did you
it
do it month by month?
month by month, it was
I do
reported
that.
quarterly. It was a
Mhm.
very effective tool with a board who didn't understand that, for instance, we had two spikes, one in the spring, one in the fall. It didn't conform to other things. So I could say to them, okay, with the curve for that year, look, it's following exactly the same pattern of last year. Relax. Okay. We're
Mhm.
going to get there. Okay. Now,
Mhm.
that being said, I think it's important that you, uh, when when you said nervous, one thing I thought she was going to say, but I'll go into it anyway. But that wasn't her question. Was people are nervous about asking for money? Well, we go back to what I said again. It's not asking for money. You're not really doing that. You're inviting people to participate in something that's bigger than they are. You're inviting people to fulfill their own dreams. And if you've done your job, you've reached out to the right people. See, there's another thing. Organizations do this, just kind of blast it out there and see what comes back. Well, not only is that very expensive, it's very unprofitable because your response rates go into the toilet. You get maybe 1.5%, whatever that is, you see. Whereas if you, and I'm going to go back to the eight principles again, that's what I know. Okay, it's my deal. If you,
Thank
principle
you, Larry.
4 is learn and plan. Well, if you take some time and some effort and learn who the profile of the donor is that will naturally give to you, and there is a profile for every organization, then you can make your plan on how to reach out to that group of people, not the world, that group. And if you focus on that group, two things are going to happen. First of all, your response rates is first response rate will double or triple. Number one, your costs will go down. Number two, and then here's something really fun that happens as you do that. Guess what? Your concentric circle gets larger. More and more people hear about you and they see their neighbors doing it. Oh, yeah, what's Lewis doing? I want to be a part of that. You see, that's how that works. And that's, of course, principle 5, work from the inside out. You see, and I go back to what I said before. There are a handful of organizations who've known this for years. All right. And they're the ones that raise more money every year, every year, every year, every year, which is what you're looking for. You're not looking for these wild spikes or having to search for the next ice bucket challenge or any of that sort of thing. It's a machine that you built over time using this understanding to construct the programs that work. It's not about the programs themselves. It's about the understanding of what's going on there. And you know, I worked for one of the top white shoe firms in the country for 7 years. I learned this pretty quickly that it's
Mhm.
not a matter of how much money you have to throw at it. I mean, that helps, but that's not the driver. Uh, these things are the drivers.
So, Larry, you've mentioned a couple of your principles. I see the8principles.com in your tagline. Tell us more about this.
Well, the A principles. So there's a book out I wrote the book, The A Principles of Sustainable Fundraising. It's available on Amazon. And you're welcome to get a copy if you'd like one. It's done pretty well. It's in about what, 600, 700 libraries. It's won a couple of national awards. It's done pretty well. So I'll brag about just 30 seconds on that one. But and one thing that made it a little unusual when it was published is that it's done in plain language, standard English. There is no fundraising jargon in it. And I did that specifically because I wanted it to speak to volunteers and specifically board members who are not given the sort of guidance many times that they need and most of the time really want. So that's why I wrote the book. But as a result of that, I was able to, in the last 5 years, I've been working on this platform to fulfill one of my dreams is to make this sort of information really live inside of organizations, really kind of change the paradigm, so to speak. And so we've created these experiential training experiences, and I don't call them workshops for good reason. You're not sitting in a auditorium style setting watching some guy in an ill-fitting suit talk to 12-point slides and it's too cold and all you're thinking about is is lunch in the next 10 minutes.
And you're probably thinking you could be wearing a donor participation project t-shirt.
That's right, you could be. So and you're taking notes and you're wondering, well, I hope I remember something of this thing. No, that's not. No, what we do is all interactive. It's all participants. It's working in small groups. It's third person teaching. It's multimedia, video, audio, writing. It's all these things. It's all toward a bottom line at the end. And what are we going to do now? Okay. And then it's all teaching the various aspects of this paradigm so that you can then go out and put a program together that works for you. Because the same strategies that work for organization X over here aren't necessarily going to work for you, and that's, the principles are the same, but the strategies will vary depending on whether you're in Alaska or Miami. Or what kind of organization you are. So I'll run through the principles real fast if you want to hear them.
Yes, just before that, Larry, the title of the book, somebody's asking in the chat, just so I get it right. It's The 8 Principles by Larry Johnson.
It's The 8 Principles of Sustainable Fundraising.
Okay, there you go. I'll rechat it, but please do it. Maybe go over them.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's on the call, if you want more detail about one of them, or you maybe have a problem with one of them, or you think one of them is no longer fashionable or applicable, please do chat in. So,
I want to hear. And by the way, if you go to the homepage of the website, the8principles.com, scroll down, you'll see me there at one point. You can click the button and schedule a video call with me. Take me on. I'd be glad to speak with you. So they are as follows. Principle 1 is donors are the drivers. They are in the driver's seat of philanthropy. And the best that a nonprofit can be is in the passenger seat that navigates. That's the best. Second best, you're in the back seat. Third best, you're in the trunk. And fourth best, you're not in the car at all. Okay? But they are driving it. But they don't drive it with their money. They drive it with their visions and their dreams. Number 2, begin at the beginning. And that is fashion a communication to your potential investors in a way with language and approach that will appeal to them. You see? So you go where they are. You go use language that's familiar to them. You don't try to overpower them with credentials or how wonderful you are, because number one, it's not about you. And I think that's probably the number one thing that most nonprofits have trouble with is getting over themselves. And
Larry, can I interrupt this wonderful process? What do you tell people who share the community-centric fundraising critique with you, since your number one principle is about the donor? And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically saying we need to reconsider the power balance between donors and communities and nonprofits.
Well, a couple of things there.
Yeah.
First of all, there are a lot of donors out there that aren't being engaged. That's the number one thing. Once you start engaging the full philanthropic community, that sort of thing takes care of itself. All right, because then you've engaged everyone across the lines at this point. And I'll estimate this conservatively. Last year, about $4 billion was given to philanthropy in this country. I know, I can just add it up. I know that there's at least 3 to 500 million additional funds that are sitting out there right now. And I don't mean the ones that are in donors advised funds. That's a whole different category. They're all over here somewhere. All right. That are sitting out there waiting for someone with enough imagination to engage them. You see, there's a lot of goodwill out there if people will engage it. That's the key. It's it's very difficult, if not impossible, to sort of engineer a social situation because always there's going to be uh, untoward outcomes of things that you didn't anticipate. Mainly because it's impossible to identify all the variables. And hey,
Mhm.
that was my master's degree in engineering, was trying to model these organizations, and it's real tough. All right. So what works better is simply reaching out and engaging people in ways that they will appreciate. You'll be amazed. You'll be amazed where things come from. And it's not just a matter of large gifts, very small gifts, very small
Yes.
gifts. And I try
I
to do
think.
that in my daily life too. When I live in a small community just west of Boise, and one of the things I'll do, you'll find this interesting. The kids are always selling stuff to raise money for their school projects, and
Mhm.
and uh, and I'll say, well, I'm not going to buy you or whatever it is you're selling, but I'll give you a gift for $20. Well, I do that to help them understand that it's not about what I'm getting. Number one, if I'm getting the joy of giving it to them. And on one occasion, I had this young man they actually lived across the street from me, sort of like two doors down, and he said, "Well, I'm not sure I can accept that." And I said, "Henry, go talk to your dad, then come back and talk to me." All right. Well, his dad said, "You better get over there before Mr. Johnson changes his mind." All right. And so he came
Mhm.
back and he accepted it. That kind of an education that he had something to offer other than the damn candy bar he was trying to sell me. Uh,
Mhm.
so, so anyway, so yes. Is that an answer to your question? I hope it is.
I think you hit it on the head. There's when you're doing engagement in a authentic way. Um, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. It might be me, so apologies. But if you're doing that engagement, it actually kind of does away with all these problems, right? It establishes
Mhm.
that two-way relationship. And even if you start doing it out of self-interest, it's going to change you and it's going to change you're going to start hearing from people. You're going to have to react to them. And,
Yes.
it's a positive externality of the whole process.
Yes. I've heard philanthropy called really enlightened self-interest. And that's in some ways what it is. All right.
Beautiful. So
There is
number
something.
three.
All right. Number three is leadership. Leaders lead. Okay. Well, that sounds simple enough, but oftentimes boards don't get it. All right. They have to set the tone, both in terms of the way they're represented, the way they represent, the way they commit to the project. Their own giving is certainly an issue. Nonprofit boards only have three roles. Number one, to set governance policies. Number two, to promote this organization to their networks. And number three, to make sure there are enough resources there to fulfill the mission. Well, for most nonprofits, at least some of that has fundraising tied to it. Not all of it, but certainly some of it's fundraising. So, and they need to participate in that project. But it's not just about it's not just about giving, and it's not just about asking for money. Because if boards are properly educated, when the executive comes to them or development officer comes to them and said, "Here's our plan for the next year," they're going to be able to ask intelligent questions of those two people, not just, "Well, how much came in last quarter," which is a totally irrelevant question. They're going to be able to engage. Okay, show me why you need this money to do this and this and this with. What are your return rates? What are your renewal rates? Things that make sense. And of course, that requires that the executive and the development officer step up and respond. So that's three. Four is what I said before: learn and plan. Learn who would naturally support you. And not everyone's going to support you. I'm sorry. Even no matter how good your organization is, there are lots of rich people out there that are never going to give you a dime, and they have good reasons for doing it. So just move on, because there are plenty of people who will, more than enough. Five is work from the inside out. That's starting from here and working out. Six is what I call divide and grow. And this is where annual giving becomes so important, because when you don't treat donors the same, when they're treated differently vis-a-vis their situation in life and their level of affinity and their giving levels, you see all those things that I threw in there, you know, of which money was only one piece of it. You see, when you figure that piece out, then you will naturally create a pathway, a metaphorical path, where you bring organizations into your, excuse me, bring donors into your organization. And over time, what you're doing through repeated contact, solicitation, engagement, visits, all those kinds of things, you're drawing them closer to your organization emotionally. Emotionally. Okay. Heart, head. Heart first, then head. This is why, pages of statistics on starving children don't work, because you've not engaged their heart first, you see. So then here's one of the beauties about that divide and grow. When you don't, because really what it says is you don't treat donors the same, you treat different donors differently. And so that what happens is, when you, and this is also verifiable in the statistics if people want to really look it up. Okay, I mean, I always knew it was, but about 4 years they actually did the research and now it's out there. So, and you get to a point where your organization has a donor base where about 20% of your ongoing donors have made at least one gift from an asset. It doesn't have to be a big one, it could be a couple $1,000. But it's when you get that critical mass of an asset giver base, that's when your revenue, your overall program, goes on steroids in terms of its revenue growth. Because what you've done, stepping back from the money, why is this happening? You've created a core group of supporters that will support you no matter what. That's what you've done. And then principle 7 is renew and refresh. Renew your donors at the highest possible rates. And then as people make different changes, different life situations, they pass away, whatever, then refresh your donor base. Renew first, then refresh. And principle 8 is invest, integrate, evaluate. You have to invest in your program. It does require money to run it, but it's probably less money than you're thinking, and you need to keep track of it. 2, integrate. Make sure you're not shooting yourselves in the foot by random outreach to the same people. And that happens a lot. Okay. And that just confuses people, because all they see is what they see on a video or an email or the mailbox. That's all they see. And then lastly, evaluate. Don't ever think, well, we've always done it that way. That is a prescription for death, or at the very least, mediocrity. You have to every year, okay, how did we do this year? Did it inch up? Did we improve? Where do we need to tweak it a little bit? You see, and always be looking for, keeping the 8 principles in mind when you make these program adjustments. That's them.
Thank you, Larry. This was very helpful. What do you tell the person who is maybe doing corporations and foundations fundraising, some major gifts, and like Shauna said earlier in the chat, monthly giving off the side of her desk? I, I know lots of places struggle with the volume. Like, yes, we want to treat everybody differently. It's just, if I can make it through the workday, it's a minor miracle.
uh, I would say blessings to you, my child, because you have a lot on your plate, for sure. However, there's one continuing thing. All right. You've got the machinery of a monthly giving program. You've got, the large gifts that you're looking for, and you've got the corporate program. All right. If I were counseling you, this is what I would do. Okay. Look at where the relative potential is. Look at where, both in short term and long term. Okay. What's feeding what here? Okay. And I suspect, for instance, that the oddball in that trio is going to be the corporate giving piece. All right. Now, that doesn't mean you just let it fall off. No. But maybe you make sure that you've got those other 2 legs thoroughly integrated with each other. And then in terms of corporate giving, bear in mind that it's still about relationships. It's not about filling out mindless, repetitive grant applications. That is a waste of time. If you are interested in either a corporate entity or an independent foundation, And as a donor to your organization, the very first thing you should do before you do anything else is make a phone call to the responsible party at the other end. And the phone call is just to say, "Hey, Lewis, so I know that you're VP of XYZ Insurance Company, and I know that you make philanthropic gifts, but I'm not here to ask you for money today. But I'd just like to know what are you really interested in? What are the sorts of things that you really give to?" And then if you give me an answer that halfway kind of jives with what I'm doing, then the next question is, so this year, what's going to be your number one topic? What's going to be your number two topic? You see, and you'll tell me, all right, because you got business to do. Boom, 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 boom. You haven't time to sing kumbaya with me. You're going to want, you can tell me right away. So then I take that information and I either decide, is it worth my time to actually make a formal request to you? And if it is, I know exactly what to do. I know exactly how to approach you, you see. And then when the paper does come in, hey, yeah, I remember that Larry. He called me up the other day. So, the whole stack, you pull it out and you look at me because I'm a real person. Um, as an example of that, in my own career, I was vice president at a university where the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, a technology foundation, a big one in New York, gave to us every single year. It wasn't a question of whether we're going to get something. It was a question of how much and whatever. Well, I made it my business as the vice president of that college to make an appointment with the executive director of the Albert P. Sloan Foundation and plant myself in his office in Rockefeller Center at least once a year. And I would say to him, Bill, we want to thank you for your continued support of the university, but you've got lots of priorities, and I'd like to know what's top of your list this year, you see. And that was a way of reinforcing the fact that we're partners, number one, and that I was listening to him, number two. And by framing my request in a way that met his top priorities, guess what happened? We got the maximum gift possible.
Yay.
I didn't take it for granted. No one wants to be taken for granted. But going back to the gal's problem, you have a lot on your plate, and you have to make strategic decisions. You cannot don't make the mistake of allocating the time equally, either in a day or in the time of year, because they're going to sort of wane and wax. But you need to figure out just how much of a factor corporate giving really is, because it's probably one of the least productive. Remember, 90% plus of all the money that's given is given either by living people or dead people.
With people.
With people.
So, Larry, and we're nearing the end of the interview today. What are good ways for people to connect with you? You mentioned your website. You mentioned an offer to have a video chat with you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Well, go to the website. That's the easiest thing to remember. And there is a link on there to set a time with me on the front page. You'll see it. I really invite you to take a look at our training platform because we do things a little differently. We have all of them created in a multimedia deliverable format. And one of the things we do, and this applies both of small and large organizations because it's one of my goals, is we have what we call a train the trainer option, where we can train someone inside your organization. And it doesn't have to be a fundraiser because that's not what we're not teaching you how to fundraise. We're teaching you how to deliver a program. And then for the one-time training fee and an annual license, you get the entire curriculum to deliver on demand. And the thing that's good about it is it's not just for fundraisers. It educates your board. It educates your volunteers. It educates your other staff and your executive. So everyone's thinking the same way. So that if you're the fundraiser, you have a much easier sales job in terms of getting everybody on your team and moving forward. And that's what I've wanted to have for years, is to be able to do that. And so it's called our train the trainer or our team training option. You'll see it on the website. Oh, one more thing, then I'll be quiet. In about 2 weeks, and I'm really excited about this, is we'll be rolling out something we call the Fundraising Pathfinder. And it is the only totally automated AI-driven fundraising program profiler and assessment. And the beauty of it, again, it's a simple 27 question multiple choice answer instrument written in plain language that an executive or a board member can take, and in what it takes, what, 5 minutes or less, and then it comes back and it tells you several things. It tells you your overall health of your fundraising specifics, tells you, the specific strategies that are helping you, the specific strategies that you're doing that are hurting, and then you get a chance to choose your goals, and it tells you your readiness for each one of those goals, be a major giving program or campaign or whatever, and then it tells you the 3 to 5 to 3 to 6 way things you're going to have to do to get there.
Lovely. So, folks, connect with Larry if you haven't already on LinkedIn. Let's leave this with a really big question. And it's
Okay.
not a trick question. Okay, so I feel you're going to have a really good perspective on the topic of fundraiser turnover.
Yes.
Because of how you think about things. Tell us what you think about it. And people in the chat, put some really big issue that you see at work in there. And maybe if Larry can answer it today, he will. And if not, we'll leave that for another time.
Well, if I had to identify one thing that is driving that, and there are several, okay, and maybe there are two, but definitely one is there's a lot of sloppy hiring out there. All right. And that means what I'm saying when I say that is organizations don't know what they need or what they're looking for. And so they end up and hire people that either don't fit the profile or they're asking them to do things that aren't productive. Good fundraisers are project managers. They're not gunslingers or bounty hunters. And yet so many organizations think they're hiring a bounty hunter.
Larry. This is beautiful.
And you're not hiring somebody to go out and clean up Dodge. That's not what you're doing. You're asking them to manage a team that you're leading, and your executive is a member of that team, and anybody else in the office is a member of that team, even the person that answers the phone and the board. So that's the number one thing, is a lot of sloppy hiring. All right. And then number two, unfortunately, because of this cycle that's sort of gotten inbred, a lot of fundraising professionals will leave before they get terminated. They see it coming. So that's the number one thing. And then they feel also there's no opportunity for advancement, or they're not being paid properly. Yeah, okay, salaries are lower, but remember, the only difference between for-profit and nonprofit is the way excess revenue is handled. That's it. That's a tax status. You just don't have to pay taxes on your excess. The for-profits do. And then the for-profits give dividends and bonuses and things like that. But the nonprofits devote it to what they're doing. But even if it's excess over their budget, then think about rewarding those who are generating the funds for you. And, I'm not talking about commission-based fundraising. Everyone kind of throws up their hand at that. No, I'm talking about paying people what they're worth. And you get someone that's good, you make them want to stay. And there again, it says, so Lewis, what would it take to make you stay? And you're going to tell me, aren't you?
Good old incentive, no? I was an economist in another life.
And maybe it isn't even money. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's, stop expecting me to do the impossible, or, that kind of thing.
Lovely.
Yes, Marilena, that's for real. Yeah. Sloppy hiring, bad leadership.
It's as simple as it gets. Thank you, Larry. We appreciate the wisdom you've shared with us today. I hope folks on the call got some value out of it. I know I certainly did. We'll look forward to staying connected, and keep up the good work. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you, Lewis. This has been an absolute pleasure. An absolute pleasure. What's the weather like in eastern Pennsylvania today?
It's cloudy with a chance of meatballs. I'm reading too much stuff with my kids.
All right. Well, enjoy that. All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.